Okay, hello again, everybody. So today I'm going to be talking about a topic that I haven't really touched upon too much on my channel before, and it's about public transport. I don't really talk about this too much because, well, partly because I've covered it a little. I think I've covered a little bit of this previously, with regards to like certain aspects of my childhood, growing up in the 90s and noughties. But today I'm going to be specifically talking about the kind of changes in public transport, specifically with regards to bus transportation that I've well, actually, I might even cover like the railway as well to some extent. Now, obviously, bear in mind I haven't been in the UK for the best part of a decade, but obviously I follow things online. I follow certain content creators on YouTube, so I kind of keep up with things sort of indirectly over there. And the same goes for things like politics and social, cultural, fact issues and whatever else. But and I just thought really it was just a bit of a nice change to talk about something else really rather than the usual kind of getting the stuff that gets you kind of bogged down in frustration and just kind of gets annoying after a while, with regards to politics and things like that. So I just wanted to kind of have a bit of a change of direction, really. And this video is partly kind of brought about by a picture I saw today online on one of these like bus forum type things, or what they are, like one of these like bus bus page type thing, whatever. And it was of I think it was an ADL or something. I might be wrong. Sorry, it might have been I think it was a Volvo, some kind of electric EV Volvo or something. And I think it's actually the same, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, it might be the same thing that formerly what is now Go Ahead North East, formerly East Yorkshire or East Yorkshire Motor Services. I think it's the same EV single decker that either that they have on demonstration or they're planning to get. I could be right. I don't know the exact. I don't know all the specifics with regards to this because I'm not over there. And there's a lot of stuff on these bus pages that you never really know for sure if it's what's truly accurate. It's like you see pictures of stuff, but it's like, but then you see stuff in the comments and people have different opinions and what's going on, what's likely to happen with regards to the introduction of EVs and you can Go Ahead North East and Stagecoach and whatever. So, but yeah, this is brought about by that. And I was just looking at the picture, and it was I think it was with some independent company. I think is it B Line or something? I think it was. If I'm not wrong. And anyway, just get to the point here. I was just looking at the front of the bus, and I was just like, how have we ended up in this place? Like, how have we ended up where? To me, I don't know what's happened with regards to, and I'll get onto this stuff a bit more in a minute, but the point of it is that I was just looking at this picture, and I was just like, I was kind of a bit disgusted, really, and kind of a bit just disappointed with the way that vehicle design has gone over the last few years now, especially with like hybrids, and mostly hybrids and EVs. I mean, to be fair, there are some interesting like BYD stuff, and I think the right stuff as well. Some of the right stuff is interesting. So it's not all like I'm not like annoyed by all of it. Like, some of it's relatively okay, but I think for the most part, I kind of find myself just kind of not particularly liking the direction of which bus designs are going these days, really. Growing up, I was obviously, I grew up in a time and an era where, you still had your very traditional, for the most part, you still had your traditional step entrance vehicles. You had to fold your pram up and unfold it again and all that kind of stuff. And, it was a very traditional, still a bit of a traditional time, really. And then gradually over the course of the late 90s and certainly into the early to mid noughties, the low floor thing kind of took off and became a kind of a bit of a revolution, really. And that became the norm, really, for the most part. Certainly by the time we got into the latter part of the noughties, early 2010s, it was the step entrance thing had its time. It was just about clinging on by the time 2010, 2011 came around, and that basically it was a thing of the past by the time the mid 2010s came in. So, you might still find the odd step entrance bus around today. Perhaps as a kind of backup, as an emergency vehicle, as a backup vehicle, perhaps as doing some kind of, miscellaneous type stuff, whatever, I don't know what you would call it, but you might get the odd, and obviously there's a lot of step entrance buses now that are being converted into, play, what do you call them, like kids, like play areas and that kind of stuff. Maybe some might be turned into like a home for some people. Some might be used for cafes. Maybe some sort of like exhibition things type stuff, etc. So you can still see them around, and some companies probably do still have a small amount of them. But predominantly that era's gone, really. That time's well and truly over. Sadly. So now we have this period now where we are in a transition period now. Like when I was growing up, there was that transition from your typical step entrance bus to the low floor stuff that came in, whether it was with Plaxton or Plaxton Presidents or like the Tridents. And obviously later on you had like the right buses. Obviously in the 90s you had like the XLs and so on. So it was obviously in the 90s what direction the industry was going in, and to be fair to a lot of people, in terms of accessibility, it was obviously the right thing to do from a moral and ethical perspective. But I think, and also at the same time, as an enthusiast, or at least a sort of part-time enthusiast, to me, it kind of like ruined the. I don't know. It's like I liked the low floor buses, but they never had really quite the same character or appeal, really, for the most part, as step entrance buses. Because the step entrance thing was, it was still clinging on to the, the mid 20th century, really, and mid to later 20th century, and a lot of the buses that I grew up with were really kind of, pretty much kind of like 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s stuff. I don't know exactly when the last step entrance buses were made. I assume it's probably sometime in the very late 90s, I'm guessing. But the writing was on the wall with regards to that stuff, and low floor became the. It just everyone jumped on the bandwagon of it, and understandably so. But so the bus scene's really, it's been gradually, I think, in some ways getting a bit kind of. It's gradually been getting less appealing over the decades, but I would say, from my perspective at least, I think it's been getting a bit. I just think the appeal of it's kind of it's changed. Maybe that's the best thing to say about it. It's definitely changed from what I knew growing up. What I was used to seeing and experiencing. And like I said, now we're in this transition era from sort of there's a small there's a mixture now, isn't there? The bus scene really is dominated by a mixture of vehicles. You've got your traditional diesel engined vehicles still in use. Some of them, probably from some of them are still going strong from the mid noughties. Some are certainly with independence. Some are still on the go from the very late 90s and the early noughties, mid noughties. But most of those vehicles really are with independent or smaller companies now. Whereas I think with the mainstream companies, your big boys, your big giants of the bus industry world, they're pretty much adopted. I think they're trying to gradually root those vehicles out of their fleets slowly but surely. And certainly, with regards to Hull, where I grew up, East Yorkshire was really. They've been trying to push towards. Cleaner vehicles for probably since the 90s, really. Probably since the introduction of probably the Plaxton Presence in the early noughties. But by the time you got to somewhere around, it really sort of like very late noughties, 08, 09 time, and certainly into the early part of the 2010s, you had, a lot more push for a bigger push, let's say, for cleaner, greener engines, let's say, compared to stuff they used to have anyway. And obviously there was the push for the hybrid. Partly fleets were partly made up of hybrid vehicles. So there's always been transition. There's always been a change in ever changing fleets. And the popularity of certain vehicles of any given era, any given period of time with any company. That applies to the world of aviation, that applies to shipping, I imagine, probably. That applies to certain vehicles dominating the railways, and it's just certain vehicles have there are certain vehicles become the kind of more dominant force at a given time. Like in the 70s, it was as far as single deckers are concerned, probably Nationals, Bristol VRs or things like that, VRTs, I'm guessing. And then in the 80s, you had like the Metrobus, like the Titan things, in various Olympians. And then by the time you got to the noughties, you were starting to see more newer models of Olympians. You had the Plaxton the Prisma, Mercedes Prisma, Optare Prisma, Optare Excel. You had like Dennis Darts and things like that. Obviously had the Dominators as well, in the very late 80s, early 90s, etc., etc. So there's always been like certain vehicles that have just dominated the market because they were well built, they were efficient, cost effective, relatively reliable, given that they're on the road practically every day of the year. So, what my point is here is that there's always been change. There's always been a endless, gradual progression to something else, and that's to be expected. Vehicles do have a service, they have service life limitations because of, related chassis issues, engine related problems, just a general maintenance costs that drive bus companies to at some point say, we're going to start investing in some new vehicles because, these are clocking on in mileage, these are getting on years, and it's just time for something new. It's time for something. They served their purpose. They served their time, and they were good at that time. They that's the where we were then at that moment, and they did as well. They served the community well. They served us well. They probably saved them a lot of money as well. So there's a reason why companies adopt, why certain companies end up with like a certain percentage of their fleet being dominated by specific types of vehicles. And that's what you're seeing now. You're seeing the same thing today, essentially. Certain EVs are being trialled and tested across the country, probably generally on smaller routes, although there are some double-deckers, EVs or hybrids. I think there's a combination of them across the country now on sort of shorter to sort of mid sort of range kind of routes, sort of semi sort of express routes, that type of stuff. And I know all this because of what I'm seeing on YouTube these days. There's a lot of Alexander electric stuff now being used across the country, double-decker stuff. So I'm not saying that, I'm not saying here that the future's crap or the present's crap necessarily. I'm just saying that it's just changed. It's not really it doesn't really appeal to me quite as much anymore. It's still good to as an enthusiast to ride around on buses, to appreciate the engineering and all the skills that are going into these vehicles and stuff like that. And it's still good to get out and about. It's nice to just get on a bus somewhere and go somewhere, and just as it is in a car or a train or whatever. Just like it is just getting on a plane, going off somewhere for some. It's nice to have that sense of freedom and independence, regardless of whatever the mode of transportation is. But what I am noticing specifically in the world of in the bus world and also in the world of the railway is that I've just noticed a general shift of designs over the last few years. Like they just seem to be getting kind of a bit more ridiculous, actually. I don't know what these people are thinking, but I just don't know. To me, it's you just see some of these designs these days and you think, what are you doing? Like, why have you designed it like this? Like, I mean, do you really think that is what that's aesthetically pleasing to someone? It's like, do you really think that is going to be popular? I mean, of course, it's not just. I'm not saying that it's. Obviously, of course, the industry, the manufacturers don't care about enthusiasts. That's pretty obvious. But it's not about enthusiasts. It's about the public. It's about general public who use these vehicles. We're going to be using these vehicles, day in, day out for work, travel. Just popping down into town or whatever they're going to be doing. Visiting family, wherever. And I don't know. It's just for me. It's just I don't know what's gone wrong. I started noticing noticing the designs were getting worse. Really, I'd say from probably from like 08 or 09 time. Really, that's when I started seeing things change, and I just didn't really like the direction things were going in. The Gemini 2s and things that have followed since that time. I mean, to be fair, I mean, compared to some of the stuff these days, the Gemini 2s, the double deckers are actually pretty good, actually. They're not that bad of a design. It's just that I just didn't like the way that they designed the rear of the vehicle, and the engine, the change of engine wasn't very appealing as an enthusiast. But that's just my opinion. But I'm not saying that like all vehicles during my childhood, my teenage years were particularly, my favourites either. It's like I wasn't particularly like drawn towards the Optare XL. It's like even even sometimes like the Plaxton Presents, I kind of found a bit dull and boring. Some of the variations of the Trident, weren't particularly. I can't say they're exactly like bad vehicles, but they weren't exactly like particularly pleasing to the eye, let's say. But they were good vehicles, to give them, credit where credit's due to the manufacturers and the designers. They made relatively good vehicles, and compared to today's stuff, I mean, they're pretty solidly built. Not bad looking, but not the best looking vehicles. Certainly not compared to some of the Olympian stuff that came out. It's like, I really think that the Leyland Olympian and Volvo Olympians, in their various variations, in my opinion, probably were some of the best buses ever built. Just outright, in my view. I say probably, the Olympians, the Titan, the Dominators, Metro buses, Bristol VRs, VRTs. They probably were the best vehicles that have ever been part of the bus scene, as far as I'm concerned. As far as low floor buses, I would say that the Plaxton Presidents, and some of the Tridents, and certainly the first, the Gemini 1, the Right Eclipse, is what they call Right Eclipse Gemini 1, in my opinion, were probably some of the best low floor buses ever made. And the reason I say that is because they were nippy vehicles. They sounded good. They weren't the most comfortable of vehicles. Certainly not. Well, it really depended where you sat, really. But yeah, I'd say overall they were probably the best as far as low floor vehicles. Although, as far as more modern stuff's concerned, I would have to say that some of the Alexander stuff that's come out over the last sort of 10 years or so, 10, 15 years, has not been particularly bad either. The MMCs are quite good vehicles, in all fairness. They look all right. For modern vehicles, they look pretty good. I think they sound relatively good for modern vehicles. And I certainly do like those long, what they're calling, are the Enviro 200s? I can't remember now. But Stagecoach in Hull had a batch of them. The FX10 plates, I think they're like registered, they had like AE something. I think that the registration plates were, they had last for letters, I think A something, whatever they were. They probably are the best single-decker Stagecoach modern single-decker stuff that Stagecoach has had, and still going strong today. And I like them. To be fair, they're pretty good, strong, pretty fast. Pretty comfortable buses. In all honesty, so I'm not saying that nothing good's come out of the industry over the last few years or last decade or so, but I think I would say I think overall, like the peak of the industry, as far as I'm concerned, in my lifetime, was during the 90s and early to mid 90s. But that's just my opinion. I'm sure you will have your own. You might disagree with me on certain things. I don't know, but that's just where I stand on the whole thing. It's and I just have to say here, just to be clear, I was never, and I did say this before on another video I made quite a while back now about being a bus and train enthusiast. That for me, like, it was never like a whole encompassing thing. It was just like an as and when type thing, really. It's like I was never like absolutely consumed by it, but like I think it was more something that I developed more throughout my teens really than as a child. But I think as a child I just enjoyed going on buses with my grandfather and my parents, and going into town on the weekends, and when what was then the old bus station, up until I think it was it mid to late 2003. I think that's when didn't it close in very late 03 or early 04. I can't remember now, but so and that was a part of my history as well. The old bus station, So we had in my lifetime 14 years of it, and I didn't think it would ever. I mean, obviously by now it would have been something else would have been built by now, I'm sure. But I didn't know that the what is now the interchange was going to be built. I mean, I suppose like anything, the writing was on the wall with it, because it was to be fair, it was a bit of a death trap, that station, and it was. You really had to be careful. It was a bit dangerous. But part of that was the appeal of it. Part of that was the character of it, and but it wouldn't have looked right now anyway. It wouldn't have suited. At that time, I think the old bus station kind of like matched the vehicles that were still dominating the scene at that time, because you had a mix of low floor and step entrance stuff, and mostly it was step entrance stuff at that time. So it kind of matched it kind of worked more back then. But by now it just wouldn't have looked right. It would just look so out of date, so out of fashion with everything now. So it had to go at some point. It was inevitable that it was going to be demolished at some stage. But it's sad in a way, because it was part of my youth, and I have some good memories of being there, and although it was definitely freezing cold in the autumn nights and certainly during the winter period, obviously. So it wasn't all fun and games. It wasn't always nice, but it had an appeal about it that the interchange will never have. That is the truth of it. The interchange will never have the character that station had. But again, that's just my view on it. But anyway, going back to vehicles, I think what the things that I've noticed changed over the last couple of years really is, like I said, designs of buses just aren't as good anymore. They look too alien to me. They just look like these designers are trying too hard, trying too hard to try and stay relevant, to be modern, to be, edgy and, eccentric and, and cutting edge and new and, innovative. But really, it just makes them look shit, quite frankly. I'm sorry to swear, but they just look garbage, a lot of these new vehicles. They look crap. They just do. They look crap. It's like, I don't know what some of them are like as far as comfort, reliability, maybe that makes up for it. But for me, I have to like the design of something. And that doesn't matter what it is, whether it's your phone, your laptop, your shirt, your clothes, whatever it is. For me, I'm just that type of person. I have to like what I'm looking at first of all, because that kind of shapes how I feel about something. If I don't particularly like the look of something, then I don't really want to be involved with it. That's just how I am. And I just think that we've gone from. I think really the designs of like buses in the early to mid 2000s, to me, they had it right, because they looked more modern. They had a slightly different design to them than your kind of traditional kind of like rectangular, kind of traditional kind of like rigid kind of a structure of what you would, if you asked a child to draw a bus, that you can imagine what they would draw. So I think, like the buses in the late 90s, well, even into mid to some extent, but certainly by the time we got to the early to mid 2000s, the designs of buses were changing for the most part anyway. but still, even then, like practically, they were pretty much more or less the same inside, give or take. Although I think there was a lot more at that time. The designs were moving more away from your kind of traditional, I don't know why are they like strong aluminium like bodies? I'm guessing or something. Various metallic metal based bodies, and panel work. Whereas I think by the time we got to the late 90s, early 90s, it was more of a kind of composites type stuff. It was more carbon fiber panels, I think. But still, they kind of didn't. They looked all right, they seemed fairly relatively strong, and for the most part, I think that they were designed very well actually, and they looked, like I said, they looked fresh, modern, but they still had a bit of a traditional vibe to them in a sense. It was just a slight step forward than your traditional stuff. Your traditional, typical kind of like step entrance model type design, and that was appealing, I think, for me as a kid, as a teenager, because it was like, this is like, it's something fresh, it's exciting, it's new, it's change, this is change, and it was good change as well. I think overall, I would say it was positive. But then I think somewhere along the line, by the time you got to the 2010s, something had just changed, and I just didn't quite feel safe on buses anymore, and I noticed that there seemed to be a lack of power in vehicles as well. Like I don't know what happened there, but just vehicles just didn't quite seem to have the same kind of torque anymore. They didn't quite have the same guts about them, they didn't quite have the same, just kind of power behind them anymore, with a few exceptions. But for the most part, especially with double deckers, I think a lot of them just didn't seem to be very, it just didn't seem to be very reliable, really. I just didn't find them to be, I don't know. I just didn't connect with them. I just didn't seem to enjoy being on them. I didn't really enjoy. I just didn't enjoy the journey as much. It just, to me, there just didn't seem to be. I don't know. I just felt. I think what I kind of probably felt more than anything else was this sense that. I don't know. It's just like there's this less of an emphasis on passenger comfort, and more of an emphasis on, ergonomic designs and, appealing to trying to appeal too much to the young, and like trying to appeal too much to, trying to keep up with the Joneses type stuff, whether it's with like certain liveries, certain moquettes, and you've seen that happen across the country now. There's this almost like homogenous kind of like thing going on like this. And I mean, of course, companies are always inspired to some extent by others, and certainly potentially by competitors. So, there's always going to be a little bit of overlap, and there's only, I suppose, only so many different designs you can have, and sort of fashions of livery fashions and certain colour schemes in the interior and whatever. But I don't know. I just felt that things just were kind of going a bit. I just felt things were going in the wrong direction, really. That passengers no longer really mattered. Their comfort no longer mattered, and just even really in the. I noticed this really with, as much as I liked the Bright Gemini Eclipse one. Even then, really in 2005, I'm sure probably because I think those vehicles go back to 2001. I think, don't they? As far as I know, I could be wrong about that. I have seen some, I think, or 3 or 2 plate versions of them. So I'm sure I saw some O1 plates. But anyway, it doesn't matter. But what I noticed is like that just generally speaking, the comfort of the seating design wasn't quite as good. There wasn't as much space. And just generally the sort of padding on the seats was getting a bit kind of ridiculous, really. Whereas, I mean, it wasn't like it's not. I mean, it is public bus. You know, it is public transport. It's not. You know, it's not some like VIP experience. You know, obviously you can't expect too much. It is a public vehicle. Let's say. You know, it is for the public. It's not for your own private. You know, standards of comfort, really, is it? But I just think that like when you look at buses from the 60s, even to some extent the 70s, and really right up to like I'd say the latter part of the 90s, that there was still a sense that like designers, engineers, you know, bodybuilders, whatever, bus bodybuilders, they seem to kind of still have a bit of a, you know, a priority for passenger comfort. You know, padding was it wasn't perfect, but it was better than what a lot of the stuff that came after it. That's for sure. You know, I remember these like the S and T plate Tridents that Stagecoach had. I think they were like, I can't remember all of the numbers and stuff. My younger brother knows all that stuff, all the fleet numbers, all the registrations. That was not really my thing. Although I kind of liked the registration stuff more than the fleet numbers. Numbers never really interested me, really, for some reason. I didn't mind the registration stuff, but anyway, but they were pretty nice buses, to be fair, as low floor buses go. They had quite, you know, very nice, comfortable seating at the back. They had this very thick padding, back padding, and obviously for the seat aspect of it, the bottom part of the seat was, you know, pretty comfortable, really. But what I have to say though is when we look at those NREG Volvo Olympians that Stagecoach had, the seats on the lower saloon that went over the wheel arches, they were terrible. They had no padding whatsoever on the back. The bottom part of the seat was all right. You know, it was tolerable. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't the best. But yeah, certainly the back padding was basically non-existent. You had it just felt like wood, really. And so you know, it's not like I don't wear like rose tinted glasses with this kind of stuff. There was good things and less ideal things about all vehicles, all periods of time. I'm sure people that, you know, lived through the 80s or 70s or 60s, 50s, whatever, you know, then I'm sure they would say some kind of similar things about their era. You know, they liked this aspect of this vehicle, this aspect wasn't brilliant. And let's not forget, you know, some of the vehicles from the, you know, people kind of, I think a lot of enthusiasts kind of look at they put like the 60s and 70s, probably 80s and 90s to some extent, up on a pedestal, as if this was like somehow, you know, in every way, some kind of like, you know, like this absolute golden era of, and in some ways it was. That is true in many respects, but also at the same time, you know, it wasn't exactly ideal. You know, let's face it. It's, you know, a lot of those vehicles are incredibly noisy, dirty, you know, smelly. You know, a lot of them suffered with like dampness and, you know, obviously during that time you could smoke as well. So, you know, there was all that kind of stuff you had to tolerate. And, but at the same time, I suppose in some ways, you know, as a newer generation of enthusiasts, or certainly when we were young, you know, we kind of looked upon that kind of era as this, you know, mysterious period of time because we didn't live through it, so we didn't experience it, so we didn't know what it was really like. So we only see what we see in DVDs or online, or when we go to the like Heritage Days events, like in Hull, you obviously have the East York. What do they call it? What's it called now? The East. Is it called the East? What the hell is it called? There's like an event where they have this like parade of vehicles that go. I think they go to like Bridlington or something every year. East Coast Run, sorry, that's it. Oh, why I couldn't think of that. East Coast Run, and then obviously you have the later on the year. I think it's usually around about this time actually. They have the. Well, I don't know if they're still doing it now, but they used to have like a big bus day in the museum area. And so you saw these like heritage vehicles, but you're not seeing them in their kind of like natural state really, because you're seeing them as restored vehicles. You're not seeing them in a day-to-day context, are you? You're not seeing the dirt on the floor and the caked with dirt and mud on the windows and whatever, and with certain smells that you would kind of expect for your typical bus. Because over time, buses develop certain smells, don't they? Part of it's the mechanics and whatever, the diesel and oil and whatever of the engine. It's part of like some kind of like a bit of a musty smell sometimes, a bit of a dampness kind of like feel to the kind of air, And with restored buses, you're not really getting that. You're not really getting like a real, true experience of what it's like to be, what it was like to be on one of those vehicles at the time of when that was at its heyday, its peak period of popularity. And so I think we have to remember that. When we look at vehicles from the past, it's easy to get kind of misty-eyed and look at things through rose-tinted glasses, but we're not getting an accurate experience of the whole thing. And I'm sure the younger generation of kids and teens, coming through now, they probably look upon the 90s and noughties as we did as when we looked upon, the 80s and 70s when we were young. So, it's a kind of intergenerational thing, isn't it? It's this sort of similar kind of things repeat each other, and there's always that element of, I wonder what it was like. I wonder what it was like to live back then. I wonder what it was like to go on this certain, this certain train, or this certain bus, this certain plane. I wonder what it was like to have this certain car, or this motorcycle, whatever. But anyway, I just think that in general, I think some things have definitely declined in my opinion, some standards have gone, or at least massively declined. Certain values don't seem to be there anymore. And really since, I'd say, probably the mid to late 2010s, and certainly by the time we got around to the pandemic period, beginnings of that area, buses have become practically just like, just more, charging points on wheels, basically. It's like now they've become more. It's like, I don't know the thing with the Wi-Fi's been around for a bit, but so that they've become kind of just moving Wi-Fi stations, moving charging ports these days. And there's nothing wrong with that. Time move on, technology changes, and certain things become popular in society, and that's part of life, I guess. But I just think to me it's a bit of a shame, really, because now everybody's kind of just like glued to the phones all the time, and it's like, I understand there's a lot of interesting things online, and kids get bored easily and lose concentration quickly, and I get that. I was probably in many ways similar when I was young, but I don't know. It's just changed, hasn't it? It's the experience of. But then again, having said that, but then again, even if you are an enthusiast, you might still do the same kind of things. But I would imagine like the more hardline kind of enthusiasts, they might use their phone a little bit, but they're probably more taken in the experience than the average person. And let's not forget as well that, for the average person, that a bus is just a bus. A train is just a train. A plane is just a plane. Whatever. It's nothing special to them. It's just another just like brushing the teeth type of thing. It's like, and that's okay, that's fine. But what I am seeing is like more of the younger generation, more obsessed with, you know, sort of like a sort of pseudo cloutism, whatever you want to call it. You know, this thing of, oh, look what I've got, look what pictures I've got, look what videos I've got. You know, rather than it being about the experience of, you know, the experience for experience's sake. It's like it's become more about, you know, social media engagement these days, I think, more than what it used to be, whereas it used to just be people just going on buses. You know, maybe it might take the odd picture if they've got a camera with them, but you know, when I was young, like when I was in my early 20s, most people didn't, like, for the most part, most people didn't take pictures of buses, like, usually anyway. I mean, even most enthusiasts didn't, like, usually carry a phone with them and take photos with the phones. But I suppose part of that was because obviously the camera quality wasn't as good back then. So maybe if it had been, then maybe they would have done. I don't know. But generally speaking, most enthusiasts actually had a decent camera back then. Used to take really good pictures, and a few of them had their own websites. Whereas now, it's just everything's just on social media now. Whether it's on their Facebook, their own private Facebook page, whether they've got some specific page on Facebook set up for it. I mean, I'm sure some of them will have their own websites or post certain things to forums on Facebook or maybe Reddit. I don't know, but you know, like I said, I don't keep up with the whole thing. I'm nearly 40 years old. You know, I don't keep up with the whole, the absolute entirety of the whole thing. It doesn't really. I'm not really that interested, really. I have more of a kind of passive interest in it. You know, it's like I'll check things, you know, maybe every few days or something, but I'm not absolutely obsessed with it. When I was younger, I was a bit more interested in certain things a bit more, but now as I'm getting older, it just doesn't appeal to me quite as much these days because, like as I've laid out in this video, things have changed, and I almost kind of feel a bit alienated from it in a way. I almost kind of feel a bit disconnected from the scene now because, you know, that kind of that picture I spoke of earlier, that kind of like a bit sort of cemented it home a little bit to me that, you know, it's a different scene now. It's a different world out there. It's a different generation of enthusiasts now, and that's good. That's a good thing. It's good that, you know, it carries on, and so it should, and that's how it should be. But it's definitely changed, and I've changed because of it. You know, the designs of buses have gotten weird, very strange. They just don't seem to look right to me. No, I don't know if these people are on drugs or something. I honestly don't know, but I don't know what runs through some of these people's minds. I really don't. I don't know how they get support for some of these designs. Really, I've never seen, you know, especially some of the more electric stuff that's coming out now. I mean, it's just terrible, just terrible designs, awful. And then there's the livery stuff. What's going on with bus liveries these days as well? Like, what's with all of this like patchwork of different colours schemes and all this? It's like, and companies changing liveries every few years. Like, I was like, what's going on? Like, you know, I don't know what. It just, to me, it seems like the old scene, the old industry, just all over the place. Like, they just don't seem to have any consistency with anything these days. Like, it's always just. And vehicles don't seem to last as long as well either. You know, I've noticed things just don't seem to be staying in fleets as long as much these days. Now, I don't know if that's actually the truth, but it's my opinion on it. I don't know. It's just, you know, I mean, I think East Yorkshire, what's formerly East Yorkshire anyway, go ahead. I think they've still got a few hybrids. I think 11 plates. I think. Still in their use. Apparently, they're actually going to be still using their yard on Alnby Road. Apparently, I don't know if that's true or not, but I saw some stuff on Facebook recently about it. So So that's an interesting sort of developing situation that I'm keeping up with. Quite interesting to see what pans out there. And there was recently some talk of East Yorkshire. Well, I say East Yorkshire because that's what it still is to me. And it's even not still on the side of the buses anyway, so I might as well just call it East Yorkshire. East Yorkshire are planning on moving to. They're supposed to have a new depot built, but I think that's fallen through as far as I know at the moment. I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, at some point Stagecoach move premises as well. I don't think, in my opinion, that where they are in many ways is an ideal location for them. But we'll have to. And also, as I mentioned to my brother this morning, I believe probably at some stage, possibly Stagecoach will likely either be taken over, go into administration, possibly face bankruptcy, or it'll just be replaced by something else eventually. I can just sort of see it. And I think as time goes on with the push for electric vehicles and on autonomous vehicles, which I think, I don't know, but my guess is that that's probably where things are going to go eventually in Hull. Because once the autonomous vehicles take off, they get more efficient, more effective as far as like the speed, safety is concerned, and all that kind of stuff. I think at some point that will probably become the norm in Hull and other places like that. Because it's only a small city anyway. I mean, it would make sense, I think, eventually to have fleets of vehicles like that. And I think my guess is probably that Stagecoach will probably jump on that bandwagon first before going off east does. Go ahead northeast does, but we'll see. Again, that's a developing thing. We'll see how that whole thing pans out over the next few years or the next decade or so. I don't know exactly how long that's going to take before that becomes a reality. But certainly for the foreseeable future, it seems to me that Stagecoach and Go Ahead Northeast, or formerly East Yorkshire, as I keep saying now, will probably have fleets of a mixture of hybrid vehicles. They're certainly reducing their reliance on diesel engine vehicles, that's for sure. So that my guess is probably by the end of the 2020s, diesel. I think anyway that most diesel engine buses will be a thing of the past in Hull. That's just my guess. Could be wrong, but that's where I see things heading toward, because Stagecoach are already, East Yorkshire's already jumping on the EV bandwagon anyway, and Stagecoach is apparently has some on order that are going to be, I think, a small fleet of double-decker electric vehicles. I don't know if they're right-bodied ones or Alexander, I'm not sure exactly, but I know that they've got some on order. And to be fair, they actually look pretty decent. If it's the ones that I've seen on the whole live page, then they look all right. They look quite nice, to be honest. I'm just not particularly keen on electric vehicles. They're just too quiet for my liking. Because I've never really particularly liked being on buses in many ways, because it's just, you're surrounded by strangers, you're surrounded by people you don't want to talk to. Some people you probably do know, you don't like, you don't want to see. And it's just full of too much noise, it's too much chatter, too much small talk crap, too many people on the phones, or being obnoxious, being inconsiderate of other people by playing their music loud or whatever. And I just think that, I think what you really need on in my opinion, on these quiet buses is music. You need some kind of I think you should have music on them to just drown that out a little bit, because it's too quiet otherwise. And another thing that I've noticed with buses and trains over the last couple of years now is these really obnoxious, loud, excessively loud announcements as well. Have you noticed that thing's become more popular? I think that was trialled out, I think probably first on trains, I think. But it seems it's a lot more common on buses now. I don't know how common it is in Hull, because I haven't been in the city for nearly 10 years now. So, for the most part, anyway. So I don't know. I don't know what the exact state of things are there, and sometimes I don't really care, to be honest. But from what I've seen on YouTube, it seems the announcement thing is that it seems to be pretty much more or less a common thing across the United Kingdom now. And that's, I think it's okay if it's kind of like a moderate at a moderate volume, and it's a kind of like soothing voice. It's got a nice kind of sound to it, but it tends to be like really kind of like it sounds very clinical. It sounds very too kind of robotic sounding and certainly too loud. I understand that there's a need to accommodate people with disabilities, and that's great. I think that's a positive thing. That's a good thing. But I also think at the same time, it shouldn't be an uncomfortable experience for other passengers as well. It should, it's like, I don't know. I just think that it's, maybe the best thing would to do would have been to allow, like, maybe you should have like people let people wear headphones or something, like so they can, if they wanna listen to the announcements, they can. Maybe that's the best thing. That would be the better thing to do, is to have some kind of every seat has headphones on it or something. But then again, there's a risk for them of being stolen unless they're kind of locked into place on the chair somehow or something like that. You can't actually take them out, or you have to like use a card or something to use them. I don't know, but I believe that would be a better way to do it, because then it's like, it's not inconvenient for other people, is it? It's like, it's like if you wanna listen to the announcements, then you can, because otherwise everyone's forced to listen to them all the way to wherever they're going. It's like, I don't know how I feel about that, really. I understand, yeah, it's a duty for modern, passenger carrying vehicles to accommodate, people with hearing issues, or obviously people who are blind, but I don't know. It's difficult, isn't it? It's a difficult one there. But anyway, that's another thing that's kind of like I find a bit annoying these days. So there's that stuff again. The seatings. I don't know. I haven't said with the seating thing. I've seen that. To be fair, some of the newer vehicles actually have a bit more better design to them in terms of the seating layouts, and like the comfort of the seats looks a bit better than it used to be in some way. So credit where credit's due, and to be fair, a lot of it seems to be more in the more EV stuff. So I have to be honest about it. Some of the EV stuff is as far as the interior is concerned, it's not that bad, really. Actually, I think it's quite nice. But again, with the annoying announcements, and there's a lot of strange, weird colour schemes, and just the fact that at one time you could just the noise of the engine would kind of drown out the kind of like the background chitter chatter, and now it's you can't drown that. Nothing drowns it out anymore, because the buses are so quiet these days. And that even with some diesel vehicles now, some of them are relatively quiet. So, but that's just more of a personal thing for me. I kind of not triggered, but I'm a bit sensitive to things like that. I just kind of find it a bit annoying to tolerate, especially if you're on a long journey. It's like the last thing you want to be doing if you've gone out to go somewhere to relax and enjoy the day out. Is listen to 50 announcements and listen to everybody else go on and on and on about whatever they're talking about. It's like, I don't know. I just don't think that's right. That's the right way to do things. I think it should be that. I don't know. I just think that it should. If you're going to be considerate, then you should be considerate of all people on board, not just those with disabilities. Everybody should be respected. Their sense of peace should be respected, and I think that. There needs to be some reforms done to those announcements, in my opinion, and on trains as well, because some of that stuff's really loud and obnoxious as well. So because apart from like the cabin crew on airplanes, like apart from like major announcements, you don't hear anything like that. You don't hear like, oh look, you don't hear some like automated thing like, oh, look to your left, look to your right, there's this there, there's that. I'm imagining that for a 9-hour journey or something. I mean, it'd be unacceptable. So I get it, when you're on sort of like, your kind of typical city routes or, your main routes of wherever you live, you're going to be, there's stops every so many, kilometers or miles or whatever. Or sometimes, might be a number of stops within a mile, distance of a mile or whatever. So I get it. I understand the need for it. And I think it's, in a way, it's a positive thing. I think it's a good thing. But I also think it just doesn't need to be so loud. Just lower the volume a little bit, and make sure the voice is right. And I don't think people would mind. But again, it just seems to me there's just this thing now of like, we don't care about you anymore. That's the impression I get with a lot of companies these days. They just don't seem to care that much. On the one hand, they've got all these nice, they call it like amenities, or what do you call it? Like, you've got access. You can go use the Wi-Fi. You can charge your phone. They've got sort of more better mood lighting, and maybe there's a bit more comfort now than there used to be. Certainly, the last few years more than there used to be. But at the other end of the scheme, at the other end of the thing, it's like it's almost like this bipolar type thing. I don't know what's going on these days. You've got all that stuff, and then you've got the weird livery schemes. You've got, moving towards a cashless system of doing things now. To me, doesn't really make any sense. I don't think it's the right way to go. And just more, I suppose, in many ways, like riding on public transport is like being surrounded by zombies now. Because as much as I hate listening to people go on and on, I think, I don't know, it's like, as much as I don't like that stuff, I'd rather probably tolerate that than people just staring at their phones and like or playing loud music. And I don't know. It's weird, isn't it? It's a weird world we live in now. Very strange existence compared to the world that I grew up in, that's for sure. Very strange. So, on the one hand, yes, things maybe in some ways are heading towards a more positive direction as far as like the environment's concerned, perhaps, depending on how we look at it. But I do kind of have my reservations about the direction in which liveries are going and moquette schemes are going, and certainly, as I've said multiple times already, the shape of buses now, the general just the design of, especially the front and rear of the vehicle. I don't know what's going on. I just don't know what's going on now these days with all that stuff. I don't know what it's supposed to all be about, really. I don't know what it's. I mean, I get that manufacturers, bodybuilders, they want to remain modern and I guess mostly appealing to potential buyers or whatever. But I think they're overlooking like the public's. To me, I think really the public should have some say and stuff like that. They should have some kind of input on it. Give them a variety of possible options of what they might like to see in their towns and cities and villages. I think that would be a better way to do things rather than some fresh out of uni guy with some wacky ideas because they've been smoking too much weed or whatever. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just getting old and just getting miserable and moody these days. Probably that, but I just don't know. I just think things aren't always like, I just think that things could just be done in better ways, really. Things don't have to be as obnoxious and overly, extremely eccentric and just excessively this need for modernism and everything all the time. Is like, I think you can do it, but you can do it with class. You can do it with a certain degree of like respect for the history of buses as well. You know, like a bit of. I think we need to go back to the past. I think, in my opinion, at this point, I think we've got to look back at the past and say, well, how can we bring back certain elements of what used to be incredibly popular vehicles that the public loved and bus companies loved, but with a modern twist to them. You know, that's all we've got to do. Instead of it just being about this endless push towards like, you know, progressive designs and like, you know, like futuristic looking. It's like, yeah, it's all good and well to look to the future, but I think that you should think more about what passengers might want, what they might like. You know, what does the public think about these things? Because they don't get a say, do they? You know, it's all down to like manufacturers and body manufacturers to you know, they get the final say and everything. It's like, yeah, it's their money, it's their work and effort and everything, and I get that, but surely somewhere along the line, shouldn't the public have? Shouldn't there be consultations with the public? Shouldn't they get some say in it? You know, seeing as they're going to be using it. You know, the people that design these buses, they're not going to be probably going to be using them. They're going to be, most of them probably will never go on a bus again in their entire lives because they don't need to. You know, they've probably got nice cars. You know, except the people at the top won't be using public transport anytime soon. So I don't know. I just think to me it's a little bit unfair. Really, I don't think it's the right right way of doing things. But what do I know? You know, I'm certainly not suggesting that we go back to the days of you know, plumes of black smoke coming out the exhaust pipe and, you know, smelly saloons and, you know, like just unsafe elements of how things used to be. But I do think that we're overcompensating. That's what I think we're doing these days. We're just overcompensating too much. You know, we're trying to be. We're trying to appeal to the youth. I think that too much, because it's like, well, they're the future. We're trying to appeal to the youth because we want the youth to use. We want numbers of. We want to increase passenger footfall again. We want to get people back on. Well, the way that you do that isn't by some, you know, bizarre sense of modernism in just trying to compete with other bizarre, you know, bus manufacturers. The way to do it is to look back at history and say, well, what vehicles, what single deckers, what double deckers were popular in the past, and how do we bring back, in a modern way, things that we used to have? That's what we've got to do. Instead of just disconnecting ourselves from the past, which is essentially what's happened here. We've distanced ourselves and disconnected ourselves from our heritage, our public transport heritage, and that applies to the world of railway as well. A lot of weird designs on DMUs these days. Even on like major diesel units, again, it's like, but I think for the most part they're not quite as bad on the railways as they are on the buses. I think the part of it is this thing of, well, you know, if it's electric, then it's got to be like super modern, like super, you know, out there. It's going to be super kind of like. Yeah, it's to me, it's more for shock value. I think there's almost this like shock value aspect to it. You know, the more weird it looks, the more non-traditional, non-conformist it looks, the better it must be. You know, the more appealing it will be to people. And I just don't think that's the truth, really. I don't think that's the case. I just think a lot of it's just performative kind of like modernism, if you want to call it that or something. So I just think that while maybe the experience of going on buses in some ways, in terms of like cleanliness, air quality, to some extent comfort, I suppose, is maybe in some ways getting a bit better, perhaps. I think other aspects of public transport experience I don't know. I have mixed views on it. I have mixed feelings about it. I just don't know if we're heading quite in the right direction. Is my overall view of this whole thing. Really, some things definitely needs to change, and maybe as the electric vehicle thing becomes the norm, as I'm pretty sure probably it seems to be an inevitable thing anyway over probably the next 10 years is my guess. And as autonomous vehicles become more popular for smaller routes, maybe, I don't know. My fear is that we're heading towards, my fear is that we're heading towards a kind of, a very isolated, very disconnected world, really, just in general. Isolated world in many ways, which is ironic because the internet, AI, and everything's supposed to be kind of bring us together in some sense, I suppose. But I just find that all of this stuff is going to be incorporated into future vehicles. There's no doubt about that. And while let's face it, at the moment EVs are still being trialled. It's not becoming a national. It's not become a national reality yet. We know that's where things are going, and certainly within probably the next 15 to 20 years, maybe a bit. I don't know. Depends on how quickly things evolve. But my guess is EVs, as far as like this, EVs being the kind of more your traditional bus model, let's say, they might have, say, 20 years. I reckon probably before I guess that their replacements will be autonomous vehicles. I'm pretty sure of it, because when you think about it from a a bus company's perspective, public transport perspective, it makes sense, doesn't it? Really, let's face it. If prices continue to come down as far as your own personal vehicles, your car, motorbike, whatever, then less and less people are going to be using public transport. So at some point, it'll be more economically viable, financially viable to just invest in fleets of autonomous vehicles, probably. Now, whether they are minibus type vehicles, I don't know. Whether they're even smaller, these kind of almost like capsule type vehicle things I've seen becoming more popular now. I think they're used in airports, I think, and like theme parks and things like that these days. But one day they'll probably, once they've reached a certain regulatory standard as far as like speed and safety is concerned, overall design, security and safety mechanisms built into them, probably the use of the internet, AI, and whatever else, I don't know. Then at some point that will, I think, I don't know whether that'll be, I think at probably the next point, over the next 10 to 20 years, I think you'll start to see a mixture of probably electric vehicles. I think probably a smaller percent, but possibly an evolving picture with hydrogen vehicles, I'm guessing. And certainly autonomous vehicles, because Stagecoach are already trialing them. Autonomous vehicles are already in trial stages anyway across different parts of the country. And I think I saw something recently somewhere that there's been like a small fleet of minivans that are autonomous vehicles that are, I think they've just got the go ahead. So, at some point you probably won't even need to bother with a driving license anymore. It'll just become the norm for everyone to have an autonomous vehicle, because why bother with all that stress and stuff? Why bother? If you can just don't have to worry about all that stuff anymore. You can just sit back and relax and enjoy the journey. I was like, but I don't know. That might take 30, 40 years before that becomes the norm. But I don't know. But I suspect that's the direction that we are probably heading towards nationally. It'll start with smaller companies first. It'll start with small routes, gradually work as battery technology improves, as it probably will, and autonomous vehicle designs get better. Then, and obviously infrastructure is built and charging ports and everything are all set up across, networks, bus networks, services, along the routes of services, whatever. Then that will become a reality, which in some ways it'll be an interesting change. It'll be, seems to me probably the most natural progression of the public transport as far as buses are concerned. But at the same time, it's basically the end of an era, really, as far as I'm concerned. And to be, just before I go here, to me, that's kind of how I feel really now about the bus scene overall. It feels like it's an end of an era for me. Well, rather, we're heading towards it very swiftly, because I believe by I think it's the early 2030s, stagecoach are going to be practically an EV dominated. They're going to be dominated with EV fleets and a very small percentage of autonomous vehicles. And by the time we get to the 2040s, I imagine it'll be a mixture of that. And probably, as I've already said, over the next few decades, you'll start to see more and more of this autonomous thing start to become the norm. At one time, it was, just as an analogy here, it was one time it was odd at one time to see people with a smartphone, out in public for fun. And now practically, for all intents and purposes, pretty much everyone's got one. So, and they're far, far beyond anything that they used to be. And that's what will happen with autonomous vehicles. They will get to the point where they become reliable, safe, quick, but safe. And it won't be uncommon to just see them whizzing around, your local estate, your local on your local services, and it'll be a bizarre thing to see. I have to say, it really will. It'll be a very strange sight when that day comes, and I think it will come. So anyway, that's I think I've pretty much laid out everything I want to say here about sort of my overall kind of views on the scene, and a few bits and pieces about kind of my own kind of like feeling about the whole thing at the moment, and just generally how I kind of feel where things are going and what the issues are and perhaps why they are the way they are, etc. So that's pretty much it for today. I think I'm going to leave it there. And if you've got any interesting things you'd like to say with regards to this topic, please let me know in the comments, and I'll respond to you at some point. So thank you very much for listening. I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you very much. Bye bye.